when it is in the middle of the backcountry, search and rescue can take 4-5 hours. They can take at least over an hour, definitely 2 hours before they're going to see you, depending on where you are. What are your actual survival chances if you're buried and you aren't rescued by people who are right beside you?
If you're not rescued by people who are right beside you, your survival chances are extremely low. So I think it's around at about under 10 minutes. If there's no other trauma, it's just the burial. It's about an 80% survival rate, and it drops pretty quickly beyond 10 minutes. Once you're past I think the stats are once you're past about 15 minutes, the chance is extremely slim. So you're really relying on people who are there with you.
Welcome to the BC Search and Rescue Association's AdventureSmart Expert Webinar Series.
Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. We can see a good crowd out there in La La Land of Zoom webinars. Thanks for joining our expert webinar series. This is our second one of many that go right through to March. So hopefully you can join us for some others. But tonight's pretty special as we kick off winter, in my opinion. We've all been dusted or dumped on with a little bit or a lot of snow. And this is our chance to really sharpen our pencils, get ready for the season for those of us who love. Well, I know we all love to spend time out there, but to go into the backcountry and to be a little bit more versed, understanding, be able to read what you're traveling through, what it looks like, and our guest can definitely help you with that tonight. But before I introduce Brad, I'd just like to talk about search and rescues ever so slightly. We have 78 search and rescue groups in the province of BC, and there's 3,400 search and rescue volunteers. Scott's one of those, 3,400. And they donate, dedicate, offer up over 441,000 volunteer hours a year to response, education, training. That's a lot in a nutshell. It really is. It's pretty incredible that the level of volunteerism, the professionalism, they're unpaid professionals, the skills, the training. It's really above and beyond. It's pretty amazing. I feel quite fortunate that it's my job to do the best I can to try to keep them at home. But if you do need them, they're available 24/7. So just think about them as we prepare for our adventures. Every single time we head out there, let's think about how we can lessen the impacts on Scott and all the others out there on those 78 search and rescue groups. No matter if you're heading out for a big adventure or a few days or even longer, really consider your group safety, but also how can you lessen the burden on search and rescue? And your preparation can do that. I'd like you to meet Brad Cristie, the Avalanche expert, hailing all the way from the snowy wonderland of Revelstoke, BC. With a whopping 16 years of experience under his belt, Brad has mastered the art of snow safety as a ski patroller, avalanche technician, and now the ultimate public avalanche forecaster for Avalanche Canada. This past year, he's been diving into an epic multi-year quest to give Avalanche Canada's fatal avalanche incident database a shiny new makeover. Look forward to that. But wait, there's more. When Brad isn't busy conquering the slopes or crunching the snow data, he's out adventuring with his awesome wife and adorable toddler. Whether it's shredding powder on his skis or hitting the trails on his bike or strumming tunes on his guitar, Brad definitely knows how to make the most of every moment. Brad, the stage is yours, and we're looking forward to hearing your presentation tonight. Thanks for joining us again. This is your second time back. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Sandra. Get my screen sharing going here. Go. All right. So I'd like to start tonight with land acknowledgement. So I recognize all the First Peoples histories, knowledge, and stories of the mountainous areas I enjoy. I personally live and work in Revelstoke, which is the territory of the Sinixt, Secwepemc, Ktunaxa, and Silks. And as a backcountry recreator and as an Avalanche professional, I commit to honoring the land through respectful mountain practices, responsible outdoor behaviors, and fostering a community of safety and collaboration. So, good evening. Thanks for joining us for tonight's webinar. I'm excited to be here with you again to talk about recognizing avalanche terrain. There's lots here for folks that are new to talking about avalanches. And even as a professional, I find this presentation to be a good refresher at the start of the season. I really appreciate the glowing introduction there, but one of my avalanche mentors said, if you ever think you've got it all figured out, you're in big trouble. So there's always something for all of us to learn. So first of all, for those of you who are new to Avalanche Canada, the simple way to describe what we do is that we're the voice of public avalanche safety in Canada. We're a non-governmental, not-for-profit organization, and here you can see a few of the things we focus on in our work. Public avalanche safety in general. You might already be aware that we produce the public avalanche forecast. We also run avalanche awareness programs. We create the curriculum for recreational avalanche courses like the AST or Avalanche Skills Training, and we do a lot more as well. The bottom line is our mission is to encourage and educate people to recreate safely in the winter backcountry. Avalanche danger is a serious issue in Canada. The current 10-year average is 11 fatalities a year, but that has been going down a little bit at a time while the backcountry recreator numbers have been going way up. So that's progress, but we're always trying to make it better. So first, we're going to talk about who is responsible for managing the risk in avalanche terrain. It's important to understand who's responsible when you're out doing something. And it's also important to understand that you don't need to be on a mountain to be caught in an avalanche. So there are certain locations where professionals manage the risk for us. In this photo, we've got Sunshine Ski Resort. And so there you've got a ski patrol that is managing the avalanche risk for you. They're going to open and close terrain and do avalanche control. Also, we have public roads in this picture that are managed by Parks Canada. But everything else in the picture outside of the areas affecting the public roads and the ski resort is the backcountry. In the upcoming slides, we'll dive a little deeper into the differences between these three different types of areas. So we all drive on public roads, and there's different highway operations that are responsible for minimizing avalanche risk to drivers. For example, we have for most of BC, we have the Ministry of Transportation and Transit. In some of the mountain parks will have Parks Canada managing that avalanche control. And they'll use a few different methods for this, including just closing the highway. They'll have no stopping areas. There's engineered structures that stop avalanches from hitting the road or make it more difficult for them to do that. And then they also, of course, are doing, when the road is closed, they're doing active control using explosives or remote exploders. So remember that in these places, as soon as you leave the road, you are in unmanaged backcountry. So this is really relevant for areas like Rogers Pass, where a lot of ski tours go, and Kootenay Pass, same thing. So at a ski resort, the ski patrol is managing your risk. If they have avalanche terrain and avalanche program, they're managing that risk by controlling this terrain prior to opening it to the public. Some areas are permanently closed as well, which might be due to perpetually high avalanche risk, or there might be other dangers like cliffs. So these are some of the signs that you'll see at a ski resort. You see these flip signs, we call them, that could be closed or open. So really, when you come up to a sign or a rope line, really pay attention to what those signs are saying. Also at a ski resort, you might see signs like this. When you leave a ski resort boundary, you are in the backcountry. So these signs are warning you of that, sort of giving yourself a double check to make sure you're prepared to be out there and to be relatively self-sufficient. One thing I want to touch on, because this came up last year and I looked around, and there's a lot of resorts in BC that have signs like this that talk about you being on the hook for paying for your rescue. And we want to address that because there's no charge for search and rescue in BC. Don't hesitate to call 911. Lots of ski resorts have signs like this. I can't answer why, but don't hesitate to call 911. That being said, all of the things on these lists are still really important. It is important to head out knowing that you're well prepared for a day in the backcountry. So other than highways, ski resorts, we have a lot of space to recreate in the outdoors in BC, and very little of that space is actively managed for avalanche risk. Sometimes there's indicators to let us know when we're entering backcountry terrain, but most of the time there isn't. And we need to recognize when we're entering avalanche terrain and when the decision-making is up to us. Yeah, we can make sure we have a safe day by either appropriately managing our risk in avalanche terrain or just deciding that we're going to avoid avalanche terrain. So here's a trailhead where it's very obvious that if you go through this gate, this trail is leading to the backcountry. There's a ton of helpful signs there. There are AITS rating maps. AITS is the Avalanche Terrain Exposure Scale, and it classifies routes and areas of terrain according to the severity of exposure to avalanche hazard. So those can be really helpful. There's also other avalanche danger signs. Anyway, this one is very obvious what's happening, but there's other places where it's maybe not so obvious, like in this picture. And so how do you know if you're in avalanche terrain when signs aren't posted? Well, you can look for vegetation clues. Are you under a big mountain and there's thick trees all around you, and then you step out into a clear area? We'll talk about that a bit more later, but sometimes those trees are cleared out because that's an avalanche path. Looking at a topographic map before you go or when you're out in the backcountry is a good way to understand how steep and big the overhead terrain is above you. And we'll go into a bit more detail on some of this now. So we're traveling in areas where the avalanche hazard isn't managed by others. What do I do? So this is us. We're backcountry users. If you're at this webinar, you likely already recreate in areas where you are the one responsible for managing avalanche risk. Now, this doesn't mean that you should be afraid of an avalanche, that it's going to bury you as soon as you leave a public road or walk into a park. But what I'm trying to drive home is that in many cases, no one will be assessing and managing the avalanche risk for you. So let's learn a bit about avalanches, and then we'll talk about some tools for recognizing avalanche terrain.
Brad, can I jump in for 2 seconds? Just wanted to ask the audience something in a quick little thing. Can you guys all give us a thumbs up if you already spend time in the backcountry? I'm just curious. It's not a poll. It's just go to the reactions and give a thumbs up that if you've already, you go there. So this could be a refresher for you by the thumbs I'm seeing. I'm just curious who's out there and what you're all about. So that gives me a little bit of a gist.
Well, it's also interesting that the like I could tell you, I went into the backcountry before I knew about avalanches. I was recreating in the winter in the backcountry before I learned about avalanches. So just because you go in the backcountry doesn't mean you know anything about avalanches. I'm one of those examples.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But fully agree. Yeah. And I was only introduced to it because I was a park ranger well before I was doing this job, and I was able to learn from that and get trained there, but just gave me a gist of who was in the audience. Thanks for letting me interrupt. Thanks, Brad.
Awesome. Yeah, we've all been there. I was in university leaving the Whistler boundary to go build jumps somewhere. And then I started ski patrolling and I went, that's a good thing I made it here to start learning these things.
Yeah, exactly.
So that being said, what is an avalanche? An avalanche occurs when a mass of snow releases from a mountainside and tumbles down a slope. This image gives us an idea of the type of terrain we can see avalanches form in, as well as the potential consequences of even a relatively small avalanche. So where the snow piles up at the bottom of this is actually pretty deep. We'll talk a bit about terrain traps later, which relate to this. We're going to watch a couple videos now of different kinds of avalanches. The two main types we talk about are slab avalanches and loose snow avalanches. So while we're watching these videos, try to look for some differences between these two avalanches. That one's still running. Okay, and our second video, watch for things that look different. So yeah, this one looks a little like wetter. It looks like it has a lot more mass to it. It's maybe moving a little slower. So differences, the first one was a slab avalanche. The second one was a loose avalanche, but also the first one was a dry slab avalanche, and the second one was wet. You know, the second one you can see that member of our field team is in a tank top. It's hot, it's spring. You're going to see different avalanche conditions in that time. We talked about how they're sort of different speeds. Is one of them easier to get caught up in than the other? Does one look more dangerous? It really depends on a lot of different things. But both of those could be hazardous to a human that is caught in one. We'll start talking about the terrain shortly, which is the important part of all this. But regardless of the time of year, if there is snow in the mountains and that's where you plan on recreating, understanding and managing avalanche danger needs to be a part of your trip plan. So right now it's pretty early season and there might not be a lot of snow where you're recreating, but you need to be aware of places where there is enough to form an avalanche. And then same thing again in spring and even summer. If you're way up in the mountains in the Rockies in June, there might still be pretty significant snow in the Alpine. So
those are good points, Brad, because we can't dismiss like early spring, late spring, and early summer, can we? You made some great points there where we can't just think in the heat of winter that this is when they would go, or that this is when we need to be looking for signs. Those are great points.
Yeah. When I worked in Rogers Pass for Parks Canada on the Highways Control Program there, and whenever we did springtime avalanche control, and there was closures, drivers always looked at us like we were crazy. But it's like there's a lot of snow up high, and some of those we're trying to make sure we bring it down before it comes all the way to the road. And anyway, it's just as humans, we're very tuned into, or not so much tuned in, we're very focused on the area we are. And if where we are is warm and we don't see snow, we forget that it could be elsewhere. It happens to all of us. So what's needed to form an avalanche? Terrain is the most important thing we're talking about tonight and recognizing avalanche terrain, but terrain really only gains significance when snow and triggers are included in that picture. If people are involved, if we are the trigger, or if we are in the path of a moving avalanche, the consequences can be deadly, and that's what we're trying to avoid. So 3 things we need: snow, terrain, and a trigger. Talking about snow first, a threshold amount of snow is required before an avalanche can form. The amount depends on a few factors. One of the most important is ground roughness. We need at least enough snow on the ground to overcome ground roughness to some degree and create a smooth surface. So smooth terrain like shale or grass slopes will reach threshold faster than rough terrain. It doesn't take as much snow on them before an avalanche is possible. Looking at this picture, the snow on the ground here is unlikely to be sufficient to form an avalanche that could impact humans. Although there is some snow, we see too much ground roughness for avalanches to form. But we look in the distance, sort of those peaks up there, there's some potential for avalanche at higher elevations. There's a bit more snow and there's smoother ground cover in the Alpine. Looking at this photo, this slope likely just meets the criteria. We still see a bit of that ground roughness, but it's relatively smooth, continuous snow cover. So even if we're not quite ready for an avalanche here, not quite enough snow, the next snowfall for sure would be game on for avalanches. If ground roughness is absent, so grass or scree slopes, it only takes about 20 or 30 centimeters of snow before avalanches are possible. Having an idea of the ground cover below the snowpack is a good thing. If you happen to have that extra information, it's awesome. The structure of the snowpack is another important part of the snow, but we'll leave that aside for tonight, other than introducing the idea that snowpack structure can be either stable, good and strong, or unstable, bad and weak. And we'll talk later about some of the avenues you have to learn more about snowpack structure. So slope is a very important part of, very important factor in avalanches forming. So slope angle can be hard to recognize without training and some experience. So what can we use for a quick tool to help us identify this? Right, I guess I'll go back for a second and say the majority of avalanches start on a slope of 30 degrees or greater. So in general, we can, if we go to ski hills, sometimes green slopes are usually about 15 degrees. Blue tops out at between 20 and 25 degrees, and then black and double black go up from there. So in a ski hill sort of context, we're kind of looking at like a black run steepness is where most avalanches occur. Remember, not all ski hills are equal, so you might not be getting the same angles in different places. And I kind of think that when we're on a slope covered in soft powder snow, we perceive the steepness a little differently. So just kind of remember to give yourself a bit of leeway in that. Hasty ways that you can check it is if you get, there's little clinometers that you can get, you carry in your backpack and check. And some ski poles have markers on it that help you with it. And then if you have some of those tools, there's also, I'm still like 15 years ago here. There's inclinometers on your phone. So that's a super easy way. And look at a slope, make a guess, then take out your measuring tool and check. And after time, you'll get pretty good at noticing when that slope is enough. Another way to think about it is if, on snowshoes, what does it feel like when you're walking up a 30-degree hill? It's pretty steep and difficult. So that can be a good cue to know you're on avalanche terrain. The more often you measure and check, your estimates improve. On slopes less than 30 degrees, the snow is unlikely to slide. So this photo here, it's too low angle and the snow is held in place by gravity. But we can't see what's above this photo. So it is possible if there's a big steep slope above this that an avalanche could run down into where that hiker is going up that low angle slope. On the other end, if terrain is too steep and the snow will just kind of frequently slide off and it won't accumulate. So we won't get those deep slab avalanches like we saw in the video earlier. But there are still other hazards here. So there could be a cornice above this slope. There could be there could be an avalanche slope with a ton of snow on it right above this cliff. There's rock and ice fall, natural sloughs. So there's other things that could be hazards here, but if we're just looking at this cliff face, there's not a ton of snow that can really stick to it. Here's a graphic that helps to place avalanche terrain in the range of slope inclines we see. So we can see that between 30 and 45 degrees, the most common slope angles where we find avalanches. Like we saw in the photos, too low of an angle and the snow is held in place by the gravity, too steep and the snow can't hold onto the ground. And just to note this 45 to 60 degree infrequent avalanches, that's referring to slab avalanches. So like we talked about before, smaller loose snow avalanches occur very frequently on steeper slopes. So if you're ice climbing or hiking up a really steep slope, you're sort of on all fours, or you're skiing and you're boot packing up something, remember that small avalanches are coming down those steep slopes constantly. And if they even just knock you off your feet, it can be a big problem. Moving on to the next piece, vegetation is really important. We talked about that earlier in a way to recognize avalanche terrain. But vegetation is a terrain characteristic with lots of connections to avalanche concepts. So it influences avalanche formation. It influences the consequences of an avalanche. So if an avalanche sweeps you into a tree, of course, that could be a way you get injured. It can give us clues about historical avalanche activity. Sometimes we wonder, could avalanches be the reason for the tree spacing in this area? Do we see branches snapped off the uphill sides of the trees that were around? Or like I said before, you're walking through dense forest and you come out into an all of a sudden open area. It's possible that really large avalanches take out the trees there every 10, 20 years. So in this photo, we have pretty sparsely treed slope. These trees are sparse enough that an avalanche could form. This idea could be especially relevant if you're recreating in newly burned areas from the forest fires from the last few summers. So that can totally change how a piece of terrain behaves in relation to avalanches with a burn happening that wasn't there before. And weather also affects sparsely treed or areas with no trees. Weather affects the terrain differently. Wind, sun, and precipitation all just affect the slope differently when there's less or no trees. On the other end of the spectrum, dense trees, like in this photo is like the trees are likely too dense to form a large enough avalanche to impact us. Not only does this vegetation break up the size and uniformity of potential slabs, but it introduces lots of material that would impede the flow of an avalanche. So if you think about especially that slab avalanche, dry slab avalanche we saw in the video, that avalanche moving, if it really quickly got into a dense tree area, it doesn't have the time to gain speed, it gets slowed down. But there's also, depending on where you are in relation to that avalanche, if one even starts and you get pulled into the trees, these dense trees, that could be dangerous for you. So trees can be very helpful to us, but they can also be a challenge. Another thing to think about is it's less of a problem when you're hiking. So you're hiking or you're snowshoeing or you're on your way up on your skis or split board. You can travel through relatively dense trees fairly easily, but if you're doing a sport where you're going downhill or you're on a snowmobile and you have a motor, pretty much any space that is open and easy enough for you to drive or slide through, it's big enough for an avalanche to form that could be a problem for you. So we've talked about snow, we've talked about terrain, and the third piece of the avalanche puzzle is the trigger. And humans are a very effective trigger. In fact, humans traveling through avalanche terrain are the most common trigger of avalanches where people are caught. Sometimes that's the person triggering the avalanche is the one caught in it, but it also could be someone above you triggering the avalanche and you getting caught. So this is why it's part of why it's so important for us to be able to recognize avalanche terrain. Among our other avalanche skills, like recognizing signs of instability, having safe travel practices, and companion rescue. Humans, we can be snowshoeing, skiing, hiking, snowmobiling. Lots of anywhere you're out in the winter backcountry. Other types of triggers, weather is a possibility. So precipitation, heavy snowfall, wind, solar radiation, temperatures. The weather introduces lots of natural avalanche triggers. Human triggered avalanches are the most common situation where people get caught, but naturally triggered avalanches are certainly just as dangerous if you're in the wrong place in the wrong time. Sometimes this happens in the form of just small avalanches on slopes you're directly under. And sometimes, as I've referred to a few times, large avalanches can run from big steep slopes in the alpine all the way to flat terrain in a valley bottom, and everywhere in between those two. So if you're out and you're in really stormy weather, you see wind moving the snow around, it's getting hot all of a sudden, the sun is really packing a punch. These are all things indicating that avalanches are becoming more likely. So in this photo, from what we talked about earlier, ground roughness, it doesn't look like there's enough snow in this photo to form an avalanche, but the terrain above this person is another question. The wind is probably blowing there too. So we're looking at the trees, looking at the person, the way they're shielding themselves, looks like the wind is blowing up that slope and taking snow with it. Now, on the other side of that snow could be getting loaded in deeper there, more of a chance of an avalanche. There are other triggers, objects such as cornices. So cornices we can see in this photo along that ridge line, they're overhanging chunks of snow that form with wind. You could get rock fall, general snowfall, snow trickling down cliffs, or explosives. So most of those were natural triggers, but of course, avalanches triggered by explosives are not natural. And generally, you're not going to have to worry about avoiding the risk of being exposed to an explosive triggered avalanche, as long as you're abiding by ski hill closures and road closures where there might be avalanche control happening. That shouldn't be something that we're worried about in the backcountry.
Yeah, I've noticed when I've been up at the Glacier National Park, there are areas that specifically have signs, unexploded ordnance in the area. You should, and in the winter it's completely closed, and in the summer you can go there, but you have to be keep an eye out for it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and there they do the avalanche control with howitzers. So they're 105 millimeter World War II ground mounted rifles. You definitely don't want to be in the way of that thing. But that's, yeah, if you're recreating in Glacier National Park, they have a whole permit system that if you're doing that, there's lots of information from parks on how to avoid that. And it's really pretty easy to stay out of the way of that. Cool. So we've talked about different types of triggers. Here's a quick animation to summarize what we've covered so far. So when we've got all three of these things, we've got the slope, we've got the snow, and you got the trigger. That's enough to form an avalanche. But if you take away one of them, you won't have it. Thing is, for many of us, for pretty much any of us going into the backcountry in the winter, we're usually going there because there's sufficient snow. We are there, so there is a trigger. There's likely weather that's affecting avalanche stability, and terrain that's all that's left. So that's where we can make a choice about what we're doing. If you're traveling in the mountains, in the foothills, or anywhere with a steep slope, then you're likely in avalanche terrain. Like Sandra said at the start, I'm working on the fatal avalanche incident database, and some of the fatalities we're going through in there are, there's one with some guys. There's an uncommon storm in just rural Quebec, and these guys are ripping around on their snowmobiles, having a blast, and there's just a gravel pit off the side of the highway. Like, you wouldn't think you're in avalanche terrain. It's generally farms and flat fields, but yeah, anywhere there's enough of a slope, it's possible. So that one was a really tragic one. Terrain traps is another important feature of terrain. I talked about that a little bit earlier when we looked at that first photo of an avalanche and how the snow piled up a little bit more at the bottom of that slope. So anytime there's something about the terrain that makes the outcome of an avalanche worse than if it wasn't there, you're looking at a terrain trap. So some examples of terrain traps are cliffs. You can get swept off by an avalanche, even a small one. In gullies like the one in the picture, you can get buried really deep with a pretty small avalanche. We talked earlier about trees being a problem. If you get swept into trees, that is a likely source of injury. A sharp finish to the slope, or sort of a hockey stick shape, or a bench in an otherwise sort of long planar slope. There's another place snow can pile up and give you a deep burial, like that picture we saw at the start. If you're on a glacier, there's crevasses you can fall into. Creeks are another place where you can get deeply buried. If you're in the creek and you're getting wet in the winter, hypothermia is a big factor. In a big body of water, you could drown. You be carried away by water under snow. This all sounds really terrible. So we don't want to be getting ourselves in these situations if we can avoid it. Here's some more pictures of terrain traps. So in the picture on the left, we've got some small cliffs. Small is, of course, relative to a human falling off them. That would not feel very small. There's a sharp end to the slope. There's this hockey stick shape. And there's some trees mid-slope. So even a small avalanche in that piece of terrain could be pretty harmful to you. The photo on the right, that's a pretty small open slope. But again, if you just get swept off your feet into one of those trees, that's could be an injury for you and makes it pretty tough to get out of the backcountry in that situation. You might be calling on search and rescue. Another type of terrain I want to talk about is what's called overhead terrain. When we talk about overhead hazards, we're referring to terrain above you that contains hazards that have the potential to reach you if they release. For example, an avalanche runout zone that is threatened by the path above it. I've mentioned that a few times today already. What else is an overhead hazard? So looking at this photo, we see cornices, these big chunks of snow at the top of the ridge formed by the wind. We could have rockfall, ice. We could have other people above us potentially causing these things to fall. So how do we recognize overhead hazard? The most key thing is look up, make it a habit to look up as you're moving around. You can look at a topographic map before you go or when you're out there to get a sense of like what you might be walking into, and look for vegetation clues. Overhead hazards can be smaller too. So this image is a smaller slope than the last one, but there's still cornices, so rocks that could fall. And we can see an avalanche here has fallen down in the path of where this rider was intending to go. So had he been there when that avalanche was coming down, would have potentially been a problem for him. In this photo, we've got a ski tourer who looks like they're maybe just heading out of some dense trees and they're heading into a much more open slope. So what can they do? They can look up, look for some vegetation clues. So we can see there is some trees in that slope, but they're pretty small. Probably means that unless you're getting into the alpine, it's likely that it's an avalanche that's cleared those out. There's also more to this image. I don't know if it's super easy to see, kind of depending on the size of your screen. On my tiny laptop right now, I can just barely see them, but right around the skier, there's pine needles littering the ground. So there's likely wind blowing those pine needles around. And if it's doing that down there, what do we think it might be doing at ridgetop? Could we be forming new wind slabs and fragile cornice growth? So yeah, we can, even if we're not up in the alpine terrain, we can use some clues from where we are to think about what might be happening up top. We might even be able to see snow blowing off the top of those ridges. So while you're traveling in the backcountry, just examine conditions around you and try to extrapolate your observations to that overhead terrain. So we've talked a lot about the risks and of being in avalanche terrain in the winter, and talk about who's responsible and how much of BC we're responsible for managing our own risk. But at Avalanche Canada, we have lots of resources to help you prepare. So first of all, our flagship product is the Avalanche Forecast. And this is the first thing that you'll see when you go to our webpage. Essentially, you choose your location on the map and you'll learn about the danger ratings, avalanche problems, and get more detailed avalanche information specific to that region, including general terrain and travel advice. While we're in winter season, as we are right now, we update those avalanche forecasts every day. So it's always important to get the up-to-date forecast because conditions really can change that fast. Sometimes they can even change in a few hours over the day, and there might be details in the avalanche forecast about that there's likely a storm coming, or we don't know what time the storm is going to come and change the conditions, or if the sun's going to come out. So yeah, get the up-to-date forecast for the specific area you're going. In the off season, we'll still have some general messaging up there, giving you some tools for things to watch out for. It's a little bit more predictable pattern to things like the spring melt freeze cycles, but there's lots of information about that on our website if you're getting into that. And remember earlier when I talked about large avalanches running to valley bottom, if that is a likely situation on that day in the area you're going, that's the sort of thing that will be mentioned in the avalanche forecast. So that's a great place to start. If we're worried about like, well, I don't really know a ton about avalanches and there's a big mountain where I am, is it likely that something's going to come down from above? Those details are in the avalanche forecast. But it's up to you to take the information from the avalanche forecast and figure out if the terrain around you has the potential to produce avalanches. Just a quick note, maybe soon we will stop talking about this as a new thing, but 2 years ago, we moved to a flexible forecast system. So you see on that map, let's go back to the last map. So you see here, we're divided into probably, it's usually like somewhere between 16 and 18 areas. But you see a lot more areas on this map. So we can now move any of these little subregions into a forecast area. And we can move these boundaries around as weather and avalanche conditions change. It's still not perfect. We'd love to have an avalanche forecast for every square meter that we're standing on, but it has been a helpful tool for us to adjust the map to look more like conditions. So yeah, we have 92 subregions now, and 90 of those are in Western Canada. We also forecast for Newfoundland, and then the other one would be our partner organization, Avalanche Quebec, is forecasting in the Chickshaw. Also on our webpage, under the Learn tab, there's a Start Here section, and that's a great landing page for beginners. It talks about understanding the forecast, talks about terrain, go over a lot of the similar things I talked about today, but there's some different material. It talks about avalanche conditions and recognizing them, talks about recognizing signs of instability, and gives you some links to some tutorials. Avy Savvy is a great place to start. It's a great way to kickstart your avalanche education. We covered a few of these ideas here this evening, especially on terrain, but there's lots more to check out. And yeah, they'll talk about how to navigate avalanche forecasts, how to develop a daily process, understanding companion rescue. So how to, if your friend gets buried in an avalanche, how to get them out. All the foundational elements to an avalanche education are in Avy Savvy. Another thing we talk about a lot, if you're in your group are going into avalanche terrain, everyone in your group needs the following essential equipment and needs to know how to use it. You need to practice with it. So an avalanche transceiver, it's a small electronic device worn close to the body. When you're traveling, your transceiver is on send and it sends out a radio signal. In the event of an avalanche, the people who aren't buried switch their transceiver to search mode and they follow that signal towards a buried person. Once you get close enough, you need a probe. So these probes fold up, fit in your pack, and then you can unfold, pull them together, kind of like a tent pole that's a lot more sturdy. Probes help you find people. So you insert it into the snow in a systematic pattern and it lets you physically pinpoint where a person is. So you don't waste time digging and end up figuring out that your friend is a meter to the right. We just talked digging. Shovel is the other essential piece. And practice with all of these pieces of equipment. I know that we all know how to use a shovel, but using a shovel in avalanche debris that sometimes is very dense takes practice. So practice effective shoveling techniques. It can make a difference between a life and death. So after Avy Savvy, and you've got your gear figured out, you can move around terrain in a basic sense on your skis, on your board, on a snowmobile, snow bike, on snowshoes. Then the Avalanche Skills Training 1 course is your next step. And that gives you formal real-world instruction on how avalanches form, where they form, trip planning, interpreting available resources such as the avalanche forecast, and how to safely travel through terrain. They'll also work on companion rescue skills with you, so you have something to practice when you've got your transceiver, shovel, and probe, start of the season, on some down days in the middle of the season. So in summary, who's managing the avalanche risk? If you're in the backcountry, it's you managing it. Some of the tools you have to help yourself is analyzing terrain. So really pay attention to the incline. How steep is that slope? If you're walking around 15-degree slopes and there's no steep slopes anywhere near you, you're likely in a pretty safe space for avalanches. Then look at your other terrain characteristics, vegetation, overhead hazard, terrain traps. Think about the threshold depth for avalanches. We're definitely above threshold in a lot of the province now. Maybe like low elevation at trailheads off the highway, it's still a little bit rugged and not likely to avalanche, but it's only gonna, the amount of terrain that is capable of an avalanche is only going to expand as we get further into the season with more storms. So yeah, get the gear, get the training and the forecast that you need if you're heading into avalanche terrain. And there's lots of resources at avalanche.ca if you need any more info. So when snow is the problem, terrain's the answer. That's the main takeaway from tonight. Managing risk is hard. Professionals struggle with it every day, and strong terrain choices can act as an antidote to some of the most challenging aspects of risk management. Snowpack structure can change, the presence or trend of a particular avalanche problem can change, human factors, how rad we're feeling like getting, how tired we are, how spread out our group is. Those can all be really tough to accurately assess, factor in, and weigh in your risk assessment. And all of these things I just talked about carry some kind of uncertainty. That's what makes them difficult to manage and control. Terrain is one of the few things in a risk assessment that isn't clouded in uncertainty. It's fixed and real. It's the ground under your feet and the mountains around you. And in the uncertain world of avalanche risk management, we really need to make the most of the certainties that we can grasp. So use terrain to your advantage and stack the odds in your favor. Thanks for listening to me say so many words tonight. I am happy to take any questions we have.
And we have lots.
Great.
So first off, obviously, thank you very much. I want to start off mentioning that terrain is the answer. That goes back to one of the fundamental things that we talk about often here, which is using sound judgment, right? Actually taking the time to think about what you're doing and going, you know what, this may not be the right choice for today. We just go somewhere else today and we can come back in a week and maybe it's going to be better. I'm going to start off with an interesting one. Someone writes in, I've got one of the transceivers built into my coat. How does that work for other people to find me? I'm guessing they're not talking about a transceiver.
Totally. That most likely, that sounds like a RECCO. So that is a reflector. It's a little piece of metal, and then there's a specific tool. It's a different than a transceiver. It's about this big and a handle on it, and you use it very similarly to a transceiver. But a transceiver is called a transceiver because it both transmits and receives. In the case of a RECCO, you need the RECCO receiver, or I forget the name of the tool, but you need that because it needs to send out a signal that will bounce off of the little reflector in a jacket. It also bounces off of skis and cars, if a truck gets buried in a big avalanche, and thankfully not common in our province, but if that happens, a RECCO can be used to find that. So that's a helpful tool for search and rescue to find you a long time after you've been buried. Sometimes they can use it to find you because I think they can mount them on helicopters as well. So if you're not buried but just need help, it can be a way to help find you. But it's not a great tool for finding you, for your friends to find you if you've just been buried in an avalanche.
So let's talk. Sorry, go ahead, Sandra.
And I love this question because I think there's a lot of misunderstandings out there, and not to point fingers at anyone, because there's outfitters, retailers, whoever selling gear. Great, awesome. And this is in lots of pieces of gear, from a bike helmet to a ski jacket, to ski pants, to snowmobile pants, to other gear. So it's in there. There's also detachable units that you can buy from the BC SARA marketplace. That RECCO works with us. We partner with them. And I just plopped a full webinar all about RECCO into the chat there, and it'll allow you to figure out a little bit more. It talks about a lot of the stuff Brad just mentioned, and it gets into the nitty gritty. So we've got the major Canadian representative, Gord Burns, who's the guest in that webinar, and I really suggest you do that. So if you have a RECCO device in your gear that you've bought and you're a little unsure, we've given you the basic 101, and Brad hit the nail on the head. It's not, for one, it's not a transceiver. 100%. It's not a transceiver. This is not companion rescue gear, right? That's what Brad spoke to, and what Scott and I know, and some of you in the audience know, that those transceiver, shovel, probe are tangible pieces of gear that you use in the field, and that RECCO device is in your jacket. And if you could think about it, this is a really layman's term, bear with me here. If you go, if you have a metal detector and you're at the beach and you're scanning the beach looking for coins or magic treasure boxes, whatever you're looking for, imagine that in being the RECCO system. So is what might be at ski patrol, at the ski patrol hut. And meanwhile, you're caught somewhere on the mountain and you're buried, and that detector is not there with you. Really layman explanation, trust me. But check that link out and learn some more there. Scott?
So let me do a follow-up question, Brad. And this one's perhaps a bit morbid, but I think it's worthwhile underlying. How long do you have once you are buried? What are the survival chances when you are buried, if you're buried for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, 3 hours, 5 hours? Because when it is in the middle of the backcountry, search and rescue can take 4, 5 hours. They can take at least over an hour, definitely 2 hours before they're going to see you, depending on where you are. What are your actual survival chances if you're buried and you aren't rescued by people who are right beside you?
If you're not rescued by people who are right beside you, your survival chances are extremely low. So I think it's around at about under 10 minutes. If there's no other trauma, it's just the burial. It's about an 80% survival rate, and it drops pretty quickly beyond 10 minutes. Yeah, once you're past I think the stats are, once you're past about 15 minutes, the chance is extremely slim. So you're really relying on people who are there with you. Yeah, even if you're at a ski hill, you're just out of the boundary, they've got a really highly trained ski patrol right there. The amount of time it's going to take to get a notification for them and them to find you, even if you're just out of an area boundary, is that might not be enough. That's why we have ski patrol in the boundary to control avalanches. Yeah,
and then ski patrol, I know, goes out of their way to be able to be on site in that short of time within the boundary. And they monitor that boundary so that they can get to those people as fast as they can. If, God forbid, an avalanche happens in their control area. But as far as once you're outside of that area, if it's not companion rescue, it's probably what we call in the SAR world a recovery. It's not a rescue. Talking about it, let's look into some other things here. One of our attendees wanted to know if you have a favorite shovel, or if you don't want to answer that, can you tell us what shovel you have?
Contentious.
My favorite is,
as with everything if you're an avalanche nerd, you probably do have a favorite shovel. I'm pretty old school. I still really like my G3. I don't know if they have any different shovels. It's just at one point in time, they had a mini one. It's not the mini one. The full size G3 is the one that I still use most of the time. But I've been supplied different ones at different times for work, different organizations, and all of them are pretty great right now. Just make sure you're getting a full size one. Don't stress too much about the weight. You want it to be strong. You got to think you might be cutting basically igloo blocks out of avalanche debris. It's like you're sort of chopping cubes the size of your shovel and then heaving them. So make sure it's strong. Lots of them now have a hoe mode where you can change the shovel from being in line with the handle to like that. That can help if someone else is already chopping blocks, or you have the debris not
light,
very
fluffy stuff.
Light fluffy stuff. You had a dry, loose avalanche, can help get snow out of the way really fast. But Avalanche professionals for a lot of years use shovels with no mode like that. So as long as you have a good, sturdy shovel, you know how to assemble it quickly. All the parts are there. You can get it out of your pack quick.
Yeah, it's an important thing. Practice is really important, which is why that AST course is important. Sandra?
Thanks for the segue to both of you. I was going to say, no matter what you choose and what you have, make sure you know how to use it. And that just comes down to that practice, right? We talk about training and then fold that into practice. You know, there's no reason why we can't be practicing in our house, dressed in all of our gear, with our gloves on, with our pack on, with it all packed in. And then Avalanche, scream, get your kids to scream at you and give it a go and see how quickly you get it out of there while they're screaming at you. Create some drama, because it will be dramatic. And yes, and do that with your gloves on, right? And or take them off or do whatever you need to do, but practice that habit of off, out, and you're holding it, whatever it is, transceiver, shovel, or probe. Extend the probe in the house. Do whatever you need to do. Watch your special
Don't poke out your dog's eye.
Yeah. But my point is, practice as much as you can. Doesn't mean you can't even practice this in the summer. Bury that transceiver in a Ziploc bag and take it to the park. Do it in the house, put it underneath cushions. You know, it's that practice piece, really. Know your gear.
Let's talk a little bit more about gear. And Sandra, I'll push this back to you. We've talked about transceiver, shovel, probe. What other pieces of essential equipment would you strongly recommend people have with you?
There's a basic list, right? And I like to describe this as similar to the foundation on your house. It's solid, it stays there, and it gives you something to stand on. Think about the foundation in your pack. This will be solid, it stays there, and you'll be able to use it when you need to in an emergency. So this list of essentials is the basic list. And then I think the icing on the cake for this list would be, don't forget to add your season and sports and personal specific gear. So I'll fly through this list and we'll toss it into the chat too, so you can have a link to it. Some form of light source, extra batteries, please. That's key. A fire making kit and know how to use it in those conditions. Winter, spring, summer, fall, when applicable and not hazards. A signaling device, whistle or mirror would be great examples of that. Extra food and water. This is above and beyond what you're taking to snack and eat for lunch at the peak. Extra clothing to help yourself in need. Don't forget that 3-layer system. It's a pretty crucial one. Base thermal protective outer. Navigational and communication devices. First aid kit, emergency shelter, pocket knife or utility tool, and sun protection. That's always in there. No matter if you're sledding, hiking, biking, paddling, climbing, whatever your thing is, that's your foundation in your pack. And then you add season sport specific. So I need to bring glasses now. That's a lovely new specific for Sandra. Maybe there's a special dietary food that you need to bring, snacks, and maybe medications. So think about those. And obviously you would swap out things based on the season, right? My transceiver, shovel, probe are not coming mountain biking with me in the summer. So,
but believe it or not, your sunglasses are. I have personally blinded myself in the winter on a bright snowy day.
Definitely.
The other part I wanted to point out is when we talk about communication devices, the transceiver, we don't throw in that communication device type of thing. It does form some kind of communication with the people who are there, but because you have such that short window, the 10 minutes, and then things start going downhill to move people out. After that happens, you still need to get them to some kind of medical help. And you're going to need to communicate with them. And our primary communication devices, like our Spot, our Zoleo, or InReach, our personal locator beacon, to try and get people. And if you happen to be in an area that has 911, 911 is the right number to dial. But if you're in the backcountry, probably not going to have that. So make sure you have a communications device after you get over that initial hump. Couple more questions. You mind going a couple minutes over, Brad?
I'm all good.
Okay.
I'm here for it.
Person asks if they are hiking. Let's see if I understand this. So I'm hiking along the bottom of a ravine and I look up and I see an avalanche coming towards me. Can I hide behind a big tree or a big boulder?
Yep. That's definitely an option. I'd also look at if you think that there's a dense bunch of trees that you can run into, anything that looks large enough to divert the flow or that it's not likely to run there is helpful. That's something we think a lot about as if you're a backcountry skier, or especially on a ski patrol where you're doing avalanche control, is like before you're jumping into avalanche terrain, you're always looking at where your safe spot could be. So it's like, okay, if I'm out there and something happens, where can I go? And yeah, a big boulder, if you can get behind it, and tree, they might not assure your safety, but it's going to be better for sure than being directly in the path of that avalanche.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that. I know if I had my snowshoes on, I'd almost want to take them off because it would be a great thing for just to drag me away with my snowshoes, because I got nice, big, massive snowshoes. It's a big surface area for something to grab and pull away from me. So I'd almost wonder whether or not I'd want to leave them on or off.
Yeah, it's really that balance. Same thing with skis, definitely when there's the opportunity to eject your skis in advance, that's an anchor that can pull you down, but you have to balance that with, okay, but is that taking that thing off going to impede my ability to get out of the way as well?
Yeah.
How close are we? We've also been looking a lot. It's kind of related and kind of unrelated, but there's some work being done right now and recommendations for helping a friend with a stuck snowmobile or snow bike in avalanche terrain, because you don't want to be exposing more than one person at a time to that terrain. But if that person's in a situation where it's really difficult for them to get that sled out by themselves, then you going up there might reduce the total exposure time. So it's always a tough risk management balance.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those discussions and a lot of these questions that we're having are great ones for when you are having your AST1, to go into like, okay, in this particular situation, what would you do? Because as I understand it, AST1s are always out in the field, right?
Yes, there's a classroom component, but you'll spend some time out in the field. Not all of them go into the backcountry.
Mm-hmm.
They can be conducted in ski areas so that you can look at avalanche terrain without being exposed to avalanches. But yeah, you'll definitely be out in the field looking at real terrain.
Awesome. What are the new updates to the ATES trip planner tool? And will there be new ATS regions in the future? So if I remember correctly, that's the avalanche terrain exposure scale. And it's like a map that shows you if you're in this area, the exposures, you have a higher level of danger if you're in this area and a lower level of danger. Is that right?
Yeah, so we call it ATES for short, but I know exactly what you mean. So yes, there is a new ATES scale. The current, I don't know where we're at on like it being released or being official. But the more common one that we know right now is simple,
challenging
and complex. Thank you. Help me with that word. So it's just 3 levels. We got green, blue, black. And that it really refers to your exposure to avalanche terrain. So simple terrain, you still could be in or exposed to avalanche terrain, but it's very simple and easy to identify where that is. It's really only one avalanche path at a time. Moving up to complex, it's like multiple overlapping avalanche paths. It just is much more difficult to assess where your avalanche threat could be coming from. The 2 new ratings that are added, so those 3 are, I believe, effectively staying the same. The 2 that have been added is now there's a non-avalanche terrain rating, which is great because like simple is great, but you could still be exposed to avalanche danger. So now we have a non-avalanche terrain, and we have an extreme terrain. So that's much more like mountaineering terrain.
Are you crazy?
Yeah, like that maybe people would ski in it, but it's like only the best of the best pro skiers. That's not the rating level they use, but just trying to paint the picture. So those 2 are being added. And I think over the next few years, you'll see places that have ATES mapping within, like Kananaskis Park has their whole park, all their park system mapped. The national parks do it a bit differently. I think so far they've mostly rated particular routes and trails. We'll see that getting updated over the next few years. And then the other question about, actually, I think there's actually 3 questions in here, so we will get to all of them. the question about will there be eights mapping for more areas? So on our website, under the trip planner, you'll see, if you zoom in, you'll see a bunch of eights rated areas. A lot of them on there are sort of like managed snowmobiling areas in the province. That meaning that there's some amount of grooming. Usually then there's access to, from the grooming to Avalanche Terrain. They're not doing avalanche control, but it is a place where you like there's parking lots, you pay trail fees, there's some grooming, and they've had them eights mapped. There's a number of other common recreational areas that are, but in the long term, what we're working towards, I say we, but it's Avalanche Canada, along with SFU research and a number of different really smart people that aren't me, are working on auto eights. So places that haven't been mapped and worked on by a specific human avalanche professional. We have a lot of information now, and we have more AI capabilities, and we can train those tools on
Wow.
how we map areas. And the goal is to eventually map the whole province.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Very last question, and then I know Sandra wants to wrap things
All
up.
right, can I jump in real
Yeah,
quick
please.
there? Just someone also mentioned the trip planner tool. So I was wondering if they
Yes.
were maybe needing the evaluator, which is something you'd learn about in an AST. And a lot of it relates to the terrain travel. So that also is in line to eventually get updated due to the new ACE ratings. I think for most of us, it's still going to be a pretty useful tool, because most of the time we're in simple, challenging, or complex terrain.
Sure.
The tool is still going to work great. And obviously, if you aren't in avalanche terrain, you probably don't need the evaluator.
Okay, last question. Speaking specifically to what you're doing, how open is your data? I know the information that you're looking at, the Avalanche Fatalities database, you're currently looking at revamping. Mountain conditions are available through the Mountain Information Network. I'll put the link in the chat there, which talks about what's happening, the latest that a person has observed in that area, and you yourself can go and make your own report. If you go up to Joffrey tomorrow, you can make a report on Joffrey, or you can make a report on Cerise Creek, or wherever you happen to be in that area. But can you briefly tell people what the advantages of the Mountain Information Network is and what they can do with it?
Yeah, excuse me, the Mountain Information Network is kind of like our social media for avalanches, and just conditions. Like if you just go out and you have a great day and you say power is awesome, or the trail is packed in really well, like that's just a really great tool for other people in your area to be able to see what they can expect when they go out, or at least what they could have expected when you went. Then you can read the avalanche forecast and get a picture of what it's going to look like when you're going. Yeah, you'll see if you go to our website, on the main map, you'll see little blue pins. And yeah, those could be everything from a totally new backcountry user. Our field teams post on them. We were just out for a snowmobile training day yesterday, and we posted a quick min after that. There's also there's the mountain conditions report. So professional guides have their own place that they can put reports like that are public. But we've also, you can go there, but we've also got those pins right on our map as well. Yeah, did I cover that pretty well?
Cool. Yeah,
tons
that's
of
marvelous.
local information. It's like social media for avalanches, but
Well,
without the
I
lights.
think without all the likes and the reposts and the community notes. Sandra, we're going to wrap up right after we're done here. If anyone sticks around, you're going to see our 3Ts video, which is a really cool thing that tells us about what we consider to be the basics of going out into the backcountry. And then we'll be done for the evening. But Sandra, perhaps we should say thanks to our guest.
Absolutely. And the guest includes Brad and everybody who joined us. Actually, we learned from Brad and from each other because those questions were great. It created conversation that allowed us to engage with each other. If you want to watch this again, or you want to go back to a section, this will be posted on the BC Search and Rescue Association's YouTube by tomorrow. I'm pretty sure we're usually pretty good about that. And everything else is there. We shared a few of that in the chat as well. We'll do our best to share those links with you after as well. I saw that question in there. It's a great one. We'll do our best to support you with that. There was lots shared. Hopefully you opened up as much as you could and saved them.
I'll
as we
put them
move
in the
forward-
YouTube comments. We'll do that.
Oh, good idea. Good idea. As we move forward, the next one is December 11th, and it has some ties to tonight. And it's one of the great experts there at Simon Fraser University. It's December 11th, and it's all about avalanche awareness study done through SFU. And it's specific to snowshoers and hikers. We know that group is big and huge and gets out there. It's awesome. If you can walk, you can snowshoe. And so this one will be really quite insightful. So there's a case study that we're going to share, and it was timely, and we were very strategic about having Brad come on first and then have Griffin come on December 11th. So please come back and join us. And the rest of our webinars are linked there as well. This is kind of the start to our whole season of webinars. Last week, we kicked off our 20th anniversary with the webinar. We had a 20th anniversary event on November 22nd, the official date in Victoria. Scott was there. Thank goodness he brought me tea and food. It was lovely. And we celebrated officially on the date. But, you're welcome to check out some of the pictures that we had from that event, those events actually, and over the years. And if you have any AdventureSmart, anything you want to add to that, feel free. I just dropped in our virtual guest book. You're welcome to join us. But on behalf of the BC Search and Rescue Association staff, Brad, thank you for coming back. We appreciate it. We love working with AvCan, and happy 20th to Avalanche Canada as well. We're both the same age there, the programs, not us. And happy to celebrate throughout this anniversary year. And we hope to see everyone who's joined us tonight back again. And again, check out the recordings, join us, DM us anytime, follow our socials, ask us questions. We love to keep you informed with reliable information, reliable resources, so that you can help reduce the impact on search and rescue. On behalf of the 3,400 search and rescue volunteers in the province of British Columbia, have a great winter. Be adventure smart, be searchable, and we'll see you soon. Good night, everyone.
Good night, folks. Thanks, Brad.
Yeah, thank you.
So, you want to be adventure smart.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
But what is being adventure smart?
Being adventure smart is really all about taking responsibility for your own safety and following the 3 T's.
Got it. What are the 3 T's?
What are the 3 T's? The 3 T's are the trifecta of outdoor safety: trip planning, training, and taking the essentials. The 3 T's can vary from person to person, activity to activity, and season to season. But here are some important ways to ensure you are prepared and safe on your next adventure. Trip planning. We could go on forever about this one. Trip planning is an essential step and one of the easiest ways we can stay safe on our adventures. This is something that should be done every time we head into the outdoors, whether for a few hours or multiple days. Trip planning can be broken down into 4 simple steps. Planning your travel route and navigation is about picking a trail or route based on its difficulty that's relative to your experience, ability, and the amount of time you have. Know your limits. Not all trails are created equal, so know the terrain and conditions. A 10-kilometer hike scrambling straight up a steep mountain is a lot different than a 10-kilometer stroll around a lake. Before you go anywhere, check the weather and keep checking it as things can change fast. This includes wind, precipitation, temperature, and sunset times. Finally, make sure you leave a comprehensive trip plan with a trusted contact. Keep in mind, this may not be your mom or dad or best buddy. Choose someone you can count on if you were to get into trouble. A comprehensive trip plan might be as simple as sending your trusted contact a text or email with key information about your activity, or using the AdventureSmart app, which allows you to enter a detailed trip plan. Training doesn't mean being an elite athlete or being queen of the mountain on Strava. Training is a continuous process of outdoor recreation. It's about developing the necessary skills and abilities to be safe. This might include working your way up to that big summit hike, taking a few courses to expand your wilderness and backcountry knowledge, navigation and route finding courses, or even learning more advanced skills like rescue and emergency training. You have planned and trained. Now make sure you take the essentials. Taking the essentials means packing everything you potentially need to stay warm, safe, and dry if an emergency unexpectedly arises. What if you rolled your ankle or got hurt? What if you got lost and had to spend the night outdoors? Take the time and be prepared to look after yourself. So that's it. Those are the 3 T's.
That's it.
But no matter how hard you train, how well you trip plan, and how much essential gear you bring, you may still find yourself in an emergency. And that's okay. The wilderness can be unpredictable. If you find yourself in an emergency, it's important to stop, think, observe, and plan. Use that essential gear you brought to stay warm, dry, and safe, and contact 911 on your emergency communication device. Remember, search and rescue in BC is free for everyone. Remember, safety is an outcome of good trip planning, training, and taking the essentials. It's your responsibility. So let's all do our part and be adventure smart.